Oh yeah, that's some awesome saxophone guitar trading going on right there between Mr. Kirk Whalum and myself. Welcome to another episode of the Career Musician Podcast, episode 9, featuring, you guessed it, Kirk Whalum, my mentor, personal friend, and all-around amazing musical being. I am utterly thrilled to be sitting at the dinner table with one of my heroes and my mentor, and I oftentimes refer to him as Uncle Kirk in the past, and I will continue to do so. We're here at Nomad's place with the one, the only, Mr. Kirk Whalum.
What's going on, man? Or as they would say in Cincinnati, Kirk Whaley.
Kurt Whaley. Now, I know you and I can relate because people always mispronounce our names.
That's right.
I always get Rippoli, whatever, and you get
Whalum.
Whalum.
Yeah,
Common
normally, in fact, when we lived in France, my name was Whalum, So Monsieur Whalum.
See, but that sounds so sophisticated.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for sure, like for instance, right now in South Africa, since we tend to spend a lot of time there, we have had to sort of navigate, what are they going to call me, because there's lots of people who call me Kirk Whalum. Because you got the Afrikaans dialect there, and so they see WHLUM, and it would, in the Dutch, side of things would be Whalum.
Wow.
So I answered all of that, man.
You are the epitome of a Renaissance man, language being one of your fortes.
Love language, man.
You just have an ear. I mean, let's just say, could we say this, that musicians, because their ears are so finely tuned, that perhaps they're...
I think we have more of a tendency. I don't think it's a given, because not all the musicians I know have an ear for language. In fact, it's interesting. I find more keyboard players who don't have an ear for language, but they're a lot more organized than say a saxophone player. Wow. Like keyboard players tend to be more gifted in administration and things that like they could work, left brain job. They could go and run somebody's office. But when it comes to creative stuff like language, I don't know. I mean, I definitely am on that side.
But you have a natural propensity for it.
I love it.
And how many languages do you speak?
So I speak 3 really. I mean, I can converse in French and Spanish.
Okay.
Right. So when you say I'm fluent, the idea of being fluent, more like if you can converse in a language, then I call that fluent. But fluent is rough because I don't consider myself to be fluent even in English. Fluent, seriously, fluent to me is like how much vocabulary do you know? That's really what I call fluent.
That's a good barometer because we are also sitting next to your lovely wife who is quite the English professor.
That's right.
If memory serves me correct.
That's right. So you got an English nerd. That's a different thing. So you talk about how deep into a given language can you go. We talk about someone from England. Uses, I forget what the percentage is, but it's a much higher percentage of vocabulary than we use in America. In fact, when we were in France, they said, "Oh, you speak American." They don't even call it English.
Big difference. Look at that. You speak American too, huh? Man, music, perhaps one of the biggest, if not the biggest, universal language that ever has existed. You know what? If it wasn't for that, I don't know. I'd wither away. I know that's for sure. And for those of you out there who can identify with that statement, man, you know what? Again, I love talking to Kirk because he was always studying Spanish, French, and the Bible. I did an 8-year tenure with him as his guitar player. At the time, I was living in Nashville. And let me tell you, I learned so much from that man. Talk about discipline and fortitude, motivation, perseverance, and just overall focus and determination. These are the things that we need to really grab hold of in our lives to take our careers or our craft, our passion, to the next level. Once again, Kirk Whalum. It's interesting that I don't know. We're just going with the flow, how we started there, but I wanted to show your eclectic side. Of course, as artists, musicians, a lot of us are fall into the eclectic category. But you, in particular, I really enjoy the things that occupy your time per se. One of the things I want to talk about is your gospel according to jazz concept.
Yes.
And man, you coined that, and now you're on chapter 4
Yes.
already. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that was something really when I first met you. During that time, I had gotten dropped from Columbia Records. And, in terms of the ego, that was a very big deal. Like I'd been there for 12 years and kind of started seeing myself as, like belonging in that, that echelon or whatever. And then when I got dropped, it was a big, earthquake of the ego. So when I was about to have my pity party, my wife, thank God for a godly wife, she stopped me. It's like she said something. She said, "Okay, what can you do today that you couldn't do yesterday when you were a Columbia recording artist?" And it just completely and that's when the first thing that came to my mind was the fact that we had been doing, of course, I've taught Bible studies and that kind of thing, since I can remember, since I was 20. But then, or at least, been studying with other people. And we've been studying metaphysical things and deep spiritual things, quote unquote. But for me, this, the idea of doing something, quote unquote, sacred in a secular context. Right, so that's a dualistic way of looking at it, but as a musician playing in the marketplace, to then consecrate a moment, whether that's an hour and a half or just a song, to say, I want to. This is my expression of the center, the core of who I am and whose I am, and so that was what we had done. We had messed around with, when I was on tour with Jonathan Butler, George Duke, and Rochelle Farrell. We slipped into that on one show where we just broke into a hymn. Excuse me, and just having Jonathan up there.
Oh yeah.
You're subject to do anything. 1 minute maybe reggae. And that's what having someone like Jonathan, who is I've considered to be like a gift to the world, a very unique gift to the world. There's Stevie Wonder, there's Jonathan Butler, that type of thing. Yeah. George and Rochelle, I consider the same thing. But Jonathan in particular, he's so instinctive. He's just going to go with the flow and go with the spirit. And so we played a hymn, and people loved it. I mean, they stood up. I remember the standing ovation. And I just put a marker right there. I was like, people are hungry for that. There's a different kind of expression that happens and a different kind of reaction and chemistry that happens when there's something that is that axiomatic to who you are. It's a profound statement of something deep within, and again, we're talking about one's faith, in this case, one's relationship with God. And so that was where that came from, from her saying that to me. And then, my manager came up with this concept of the gospel according to jazz, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, but like jazz being this voice that represents, spontaneity and vulnerability of expression, as opposed to, feeling like you had to. That it has to go through some sort of grid or something. It's if you think about it, I have a feeling that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John did that too. That they just spoke what was their. Yes, apparently, if you go in theological circles, there was a source that they call Q. Stands for Quele, and that source nobody knows exactly what that was. But in other words, it was something that they were taking their notes from, because if you notice, there's parallel, Matthew, Mark, and Luke in particular, they're speaking from the same script, as it were. What is that script? Again, they call that Q, Quele, right? And so this, if you think about it, when we when we play what's in our hearts and we're expressing this affinity for the Savior, then really I consider it to be like you're coming from somewhere deep that is you can't really put your finger on it, you know. And so that's really what excited me about being able to kind of pursue this other path where we're expressing the inexpressible. We're talking about the divine. Again, we know the revelation we have of Jesus the Christ, right, the Son of God, who came and died for our sins and then resurrected, right? And yet, you know, there's the Creator God who is, wow, I mean, is so far above anything that we could comprehend. How wonderful, how sweet it is that God revealed God's self to us through this Christ. And so we have a story to tell. We know who this, you know, who this God is because Jesus was literally said the image of the invisible God. And so here we are telling our story. We're relating our, you know, I don't want to say reaction, but our interaction with this amazing God who we can't put up our finger on, you know. That's where all that came from.
If you've had the pleasure of seeing Kirk perform live, then you know exactly what he's talking about. He really does express himself musically and spiritually simultaneously. And you know what? I'm grateful for that because it's a perspective that I believe everyone can benefit from. Now, whether you share the exact same beliefs as he or myself or anyone else around, I don't think it matters. We're just talking about edifying one another. And look, we're all in this together, right? So for me, I count it a blessing. So you come out of this thing, you have the big record deal, now all of a sudden your wisdom-filled wife says, hey, what can you do? How can you do it differently now? What can you do now that you've never done before? And then you go hang out with Jonathan Butler and you do a hymn, and it's like wonderful feedback. So this gives you, now you're on chapter 4, so you're growing it to a point that, I mean, it's probably exceeded initial expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, the fact is that the success that I had with my most successful record, which I believe still to this date is For You, doesn't hold a candle to, you know, the gospel for the jazz. I mean, you know, not only that, owning the masters, you know what I mean, and as well being able to, you know, the smaller venues, but to be in demand in Rio and in Belfast and in Accra, Ghana, and in Cape Town at the same time at any level, you know, I owe the gospel according to jazz for that.
You cut the middleman out, man. There's so many times when the machine, i.e. the big record label, the corporate conglomerates, right, get in the way. Well, why can't we go tour Europe? Oh, there's not enough money there.
Right.
Well, wait a minute, because you need your 15-20% commission? No.
Right.
Let's cut the middleman out. Let's get straight to the source. Now, see? And not that I'm all-knowing, but from what I've gathered of touring around the world and playing with world-class musicians such as yourself, is the world is a big place, and most of the world, outside of America, really appreciates good music, and that one of those, you know, forms being jazz or any variation thereof.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So now it's an interesting duality because you're talking about these two. I don't want to say idioms for religion, but you're talking about jazz as an idiom, right?
Yeah.
Is that safe to say?
Right.
Religion, and I don't call you a religious man because you're not. You, one of the biggest things, bro, is you lead by example. You don't go beat people over the head with words. You just do. And then people, for the most part, come up to you and say, geez, man, what are you doing? I noticed you're doing this and that, but why do you do that? All right, and they question. Yeah.
I would say really that you could say, just using the gospel according to jazz as our model, you could say that the gospel is content. and jazz is the delivery system,
Okay,
or
there you
the,
go.
say in the metaphor of a FedEx delivery person, that what's in the package is gospel. The package itself is
The
jazz.
FedEx guy is
Yeah.
jazz with the
Exactly.
right.
So in other
Okay.
words, the idea is that the content it's all that matters. But and so when you got that perspective, then you can say, okay, now every individual is going to relate to that content. And again, this is a person we're talking about. That's another beautiful thing, is that it's not, you're right, it's not religion, because then we could truly say that it was content. I'm only using that metaphor just to kind of get the point across, but it's
Okay.
actually an individual. So it's like there's an invitation in there, like inside of that box is an invitation, and the invitation is to a real life relationship, to this banquet where you get to meet this person who will change your life forever, right? And who has known you from the very beginning. It's like you meet that individual who not only knows all about you, but has all the answers to your questions, and all the things that you've been trying to accomplish are accomplished in this person. And and that has to do with every area of your life, whether it's your craft or you spiritually, all of that.
Ronnie Laws, Arnett Cobb, George Duke. Wherever your source of inspiration comes, it's always great to acknowledge and to bestow grace and accolades upon those people who have paved the way before you. That's definitely what Kirk has done here. On top of that, he's taken the whole concept of music and the gospel to another level. My artist alias is Nomad, but all professional musicians, we're all nomadic in a sense, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where I derived mine from. My father growing up in Cuba, moving around, bouncing around. Similar story for yourself. Mm-hmm. You were born here in the United States in Memphis, is that correct? Mm-hmm. But then tell us about your path after that.
Right, so at 17, 18, went to Texas Southern in Houston. Could not wait to leave home. There are two kinds of people, right? The people who's like, I'm not going anywhere. And the other person is like, just give me a ticket, doesn't matter, I'm going.
Yeah.
And so couldn't wait to get there, and from there, and that was serendipitous because I ended up hanging out at the same place where Joe Sample and Wilton Felder and Hubert Laws and Ronnie Laws all went to school, and I didn't even realize that when I got there. And then as well, I met the guy who really turned my musical saxophone into something, and that's Arnett Cobb. And so, yeah, that was huge. But then from Houston, Ruby and I got married in Houston because we were both in school there, and still in school when we got married. And then in 1980, and then I graduated in 82. And then eventually moved to LA, in 87. And, lived there for about 4 years. And then one day we're standing there in an apartment washing dishes, and Ruby says, you know what, we don't just go to Paris, because I had said years ago, I said, one of these we're going to move to Paris. Stayed there for a summer and stayed with a French family and learned French. Begun to learn French. Love French. And so she says to me this day, about 1990, she said, well, if we don't just do this, we're probably never going to do it. And, she being the more stable one, you know what I mean? I knew that her saying that was like, okay, go, let's go. Don't worry about anything. So just sell everything and go. So we did.
Greater weight to the term, behind every great man, there's an even greater woman. It just adds more truth to that.
It's so true, man. And just to have that support system. When you're a family, it is the family dream. It can become something really beautiful. And it does have import. Like our children were able to live in another country and see another culture. So we did that in 91, and we were going to stay a little longer, but we stayed about a year and a half. And then we moved back because I was touring with Whitney Houston. And so she was ready to go back on the road.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because I have to ask you now. So this was right about the time that you hooked up with Whitney.
Yes.
Just tell us about that a little bit.
Absolutely. So I started playing with her in '89 because I had hired Ricky Minor, who eventually was her musical director, but at the time
Excuse
was
me,
a bass.
you had hired Ricky.
I hired him, yeah,
That's
to
awesome.
play a jazz gig, and because I had asked around, who's
Who's
who
the
can
cat?
play.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
just moved to LA, and Land Richards said we should definitely hire Ricky Minor,
And Lan Richards is the
great drummer from
famed
Houston.
drummer. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
And I had known him when he was 16, 17 in Houston,
Look at that.
and
Yeah.
so he said, "Man, you got to hire Ricky." So I called Ricky, he plays the gig. Next day, he calls me. He's like, "Man, I didn't mention this last night, but I just got promoted with Whitney. Not just playing bass with her. Now I'm her musical director."
Wow.
And I convinced her that if you hire me, you know what, it's gonna cost a lot of money, not so much because of me, because I'm gonna hire all of the best. Like studio musicians. And it's like, you're Whitney Houston, you should have
You should
the best
have
of the best.
cream of the crop. Yes.
Exactly.
Subscribe at the Career Musician Podcast.
We'll always love you. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yes,
So it turns out that the solo Kirk played on I Will Always Love You, the Dolly Parton song, made hugely famous all over again by Whitney Houston, is in fact the most heard saxophone solo throughout the world. That's pretty impressive. In addition to his stint with Whitney, Kirk has played with a huge list of heavy cats, the baddest bleepity bleeps on their instruments, around. From George Duke, Paul Jackson Jr., Greg Fillinganes, Ricky Lawson, just go down the list. Rick Braun, Norman Brown, contemporaries, cats from back in the day, new cats, heavy cats, left cats, right cats, you name it. On top of all that, that's him burning right there on my album, the song called Cat Dog on Discovery Anew, that he also produced for me. Good stuff, man. Thank you, Kirk. I love Ricky, the way Ricky put it. And not that you're going to have to pay me this ton of money, but because I'm going to hire the best of the best, it's going to cost you money, but in the long run, you're going to benefit.
Exactly. You're going to be so happy. Yeah.
And that's music business 101, if I might interject, for all those would-be music directors
Right.
and, hopeful career musicians. That's
Right.
profound right there.
Absolutely. And you're going to have to pay Ricky too.
Of course. But that was a very politically correct way of
Absolutely.
him delivering that message.
Well, she did, and sure enough, it was from Ricky Lawson on, just all the Paul Jackson Jr. I mean, so people playing the actual Michael Jackson sessions, So, once that happened, he said that to me, and he said, "Man, well, how would you feel about going on the road with Houston?" And I honestly, I was ambivalent because, on the one hand, I'm stupid enough to not really be thinking about how much money I'd be making as much as, man, what am I sacrificing? Because I'm trying to do my own thing and I'm trying to continue to build. It's not like I had to start it, like they say, off the turnip truck. I had been building this thing since I was, 22, where I'm playing my gig with my band at a small club in Houston, and then finally get a record deal and all of that. And so now, years down, now I've got 3 records out and I get this call. And so it's like, wow, okay. So my trajectory is not as steep, but it is a trajectory and it is upward. So to take this quote unquote hiatus is the way I looked at it.
Potential diversion.
There's a diversion from what I arguably should have been doing. Now there were people who said to me at the time, "Well, hey, yeah, but listen, you're playing with Whitney Houston. Just think of how many more people you'd be exposed to."
Impact. Yeah.
So that actually wasn't really so much the case until much later. Okay, so when the demographic that you got to really think in terms like marketing terms, like the sort of more sophisticated little older demographic that I was shooting for without knowing it. I'm just playing this particular kind of music.
Right.
Is not the demographic that Whitney was commanding, which was global, but nonetheless different.
Pop, because it's different. At the time, it was the pop of the day.
Absolutely.
Which was a younger demographic.
12 years old to 30.
And you're doing this sophisticated, more instrumental-based music
right.
that has a lot of jazz elements in it, but also R&B
exactly.
elements.
Yeah. Right. So, that was, that was pretty obvious to me, and those people who said that, I would love to go back to them and say, actually, I was right. But the fast forward after the Bodyguard, and since that's a big calling card for me now, to be able to say, oh, he's the guy that played the saxophone solo in the Bodyguard. And by the way, that saxophone solo has been heard by more people than any other recorded saxophone solo. Now that is a distinctive that I find absurd because,
right.
We could sit here and pull up some John Coltrane.
Yes, but you said the magic word, marketing.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a whole different animal now. But look at the genius in that, how that now works in your favor.
Exactly.
Right? And
so
I
you
think that's what you're saying
that.
here. You leveraged it. Yes, correct.
Yeah. So that's
and you continue to leverage it.
Exactly.
It's part of what we do.
And whatever that is, like you got to find some way to connect with the masses. And again, that your masses, quote unquote, may be, maybe just thousands of people as opposed to millions of people. It just depends. But the idea is to try to be who you are, but be as smart as you can to leverage those things to your benefit. I am pretty dogmatic about, not being overboard on the sort of LA mentality of, hey, you gotta, really go out there and network. I don't know. I just feel like your networking is gonna happen if you're that great. It's gonna happen anyway.
Kirk, what you're saying here is so important for the up and coming young professional musician. This really is the crux of the matter. I mean, because relating to my own life, I always knew I was an artist. I always wanted to play my songs and sing my songs. I wrote lyrics and also instrumental music, but I never did because I always wanted to be a professional musician too, and I loved that side of it, both the studio and the touring, and I had more success in that side. Right. So I naturally was inclined to just go with that. But this is what you're talking about. These are the decisions that I think every young musician on the cusp of this, right at this time, they have to actually, unfortunately, ask themselves these questions and be brutally honest with themselves. And it sounds like you were doing that. It sounds like you might have made some adjustments along the way.
Right, absolutely.
But it also sounds like it worked out for the greater benefit to your solo career, that was the original focus.
Yeah, and I will say, you really do have to kind of manage your expectations and kind of, like have those hard conversations, like just the come to Jesus moment with yourself and say, okay, man, how bad do you want the newest BMW? How important is that to you?
Versus persevering for your own solo
career. Doing your thing and trying to have this narrative that that builds, and you can look back and you can stare at your children in the face and say, I did, this is what I did, and it was meaningful. I got a lot of joy out of it. It was a lot of hard work, but I even got joy out of that. And so, but I think that you do have to you got to grapple with that, because I think there is a sacrifice. Like, I don't think that I'm I in fact know that I'm not a great business person. In other words, my strengths are not in strategic thinking. I know people who are strategic thinkers, and I'm in awe of them. Okay, I think that there's so many different kinds of people, but the way that I know that I'm wired is that really I have to feel something, and the thing that I feel, I want to convey, having worked really hard at developing it, you know, and I get my satisfaction out of that. Like I get the satisfaction out of having worked hard to present this.
Sure.
You know, and again, you know, that has a spiritual dimension to it, but for me, just in terms of career terms, you know, you can make a really, really decent living playing music at a high level without, and again, I want to be careful because I don't want to push my particular MO on someone else, but without bastardizing what it is that you know that you feel like you should be doing or that you're really good at doing.
Ladies and gents, need I say more? That's the whole premise of this podcast. You can have a career as a solo artist. You can have a career as a side man. It's all about decisions and which lane you want to drive in. And this is my whole MO, my modus operandi, if you will. What do you want to do? Where lies your strengths? Find out, but find out early if you can, because you're just going to save yourself some time. And guess what? If you didn't find out early, that's okay too, because it's all part of the journey and you learned a lot along the way.
You're listening to the Career Musician Podcast by Nomad.
A couple quick questions. You've been so gracious. I really appreciate your time. Practicing. You still practice every day, I bet, don't you?
I do, yeah. And here's the thing is that for me, you know, when you say every day, you know, you don't do anything every day but breathe, right? And eat.
Right.
But I think as far as, you know, the days that I have that, you know, I'm not on the road, I'm not on a plane or wherever, counting those days as every day, pretty much most of them.
Right.
You know, yeah. Right. If there are some times when, you know, I just don't feel good or I don't feel like it, whatever. But I'm pretty much about practicing. That's you know.
Your practice regimen is it first of all, is it a regimen or is it a free spirited gesture that takes time over the course of the day?
For me, it's kind of a regimen because. You know, I feel like I can. It's funny, right? For somebody who says that, you know, I'm really not a good administrator and I'm not a good multitasker. But when it comes to practicing, you know, I tend to be very regimented.
Because you have lofty goals, and in order to achieve those goals, you have to be organized.
You gotta
right?
be organized.
That's what I feel in my own practice life.
You gotta be organized. That's
and you're documenting as you go.
Yep, I have to show you right here. I have my practice journal on my phone.
There you go. Practice journal. I love that.
Yeah, I have a practice journal. Now I also have a written one, but I depends. Like there are seasons when I don't document as well because I know where I am or what I'm working on, and what I'm working on right now is kind of cyclical. It's like you know, I know that this phase is about me getting my head around this, my fingers around this particular way of playing scales, like playing them in 7. You know, that's the main thing. And just doing these patterns in 7s as opposed to 8 because there's only 7 notes
in the scale. That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
So as well, it also helps me to think in odd time signatures. That's why the Gospel of Jazz chapter 4 is very heavy on, you know, these other time signatures.
Madiba, let me just say, I am playing Kirk's tune Madiba with him, and it's a wonderful display of odd meter and
hemiolas,
but with such passion and still, you know. So for me, I have TMI, technique, method, implementation. The technique, learning how to make your fingers burn faster, right? All the scales, arpeggios you can do. Method is, what is the method you're going with? I'm discussing scale chord relationships, or I'm discussing hemiolas or odd meters. That's kind of a method thing. Implementation. Okay, now you got your technique and your method. Go ahead and do it. Show
Yeah.
me what you can do, kid. You
Right,
know,
right,
so
right. Make
sounds
music out of that.
Make music out of that. That's difficult. Making music. Yeah, that's Kirk. Oh, listen to that. That's Kirk jamming with his Uncle Hugh Peanut Whalum. I've had the pleasure of meeting and playing some gigs with Peanut. Let me tell you, that guy is a blast. He had his own career just full of incredible music. And, it was really cool that Kirk did an album together with him. I just wanted to remind everybody that all the music you're hearing throughout this episode comes from Kirk's catalog. His discography is quite varied, and he's done many albums with family members, including Uncle Peanut. Also, his brother, Kevin Whalum, is featured on quite a bit, all the while bringing together different genres: gospel, jazz, R&B, funk, classical, blues, melding all the different textures and colors together. Makes for a really nice sound. But I wanted to remind you, this didn't happen overnight. It takes time to build a career. So remember, persevere. Social media, branding or bragging, and where's the line?
That's great. Yeah, so I would say that social media is all at once the greatest avenue and the greatest distraction ever created.
I agreed wholeheartedly.
You know what I mean? So I'm grateful for the avenues, that it opens. And I at an early point, I had sense enough to know that, it's worth investing in it, literally, financially. So I actually have someone on retainer who deals with social media for me. Now I also,
You
post
make your
things.
posts, absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's a business decision, and that's a very wise one. Yeah.
And I think even at my level, like, there are people like, Rihanna, who have a team of people doing social media. But definitely at my level, I think it's, I think anyone should, whatever is commensurate with, what you can afford, you should make that an investment because, nowadays it is about making those connections, and it's about you having those connections is what determines what you're able to leverage at the nationwide or global on that level.
Right.
Having those connections, being able to prove by an actual metric where somebody look
The
on there and
metrics, the
says,
analytics, and
yes.
how it's measured with metrics. Yes, absolutely.
Which is funny, right? Because there used to be, TV shows get ratings and stuff, or radio shows get ratings, but those ratings were kind of slippery because, this is like they're taking averages. But now, with
pretty accurate.
these metrics, it's like, no, we know precisely how many people are not listening to you at this moment, so
Ouch.
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so,
that's true.
and rather than me getting into that, because again, I feel like it would be a distraction. Like,
Right.
the same thing as like programming. I went into, when we were living in Nashville, I went through that learning curve of realizing that, wait a minute, I do not want to know this much about Logic or
remember.
outboard gear or Pro Tools or any of that. Or at that
Yes.
time it was the Digital Performer.
The DP we were both using.
That's
and you
right.
had Jared, fantastic
right.
engineer who's working for you.
That's right,
Yeah.
programmer. And,
But these are the questions you say, look, am I going to spend my time doing X or Y or Z? And where are you best served? Where are you best suited to do this?
yeah,
right?
who are you? That's really important. Like you have to really
huge.
figure that out. And I know that I missed some. That time, you can't get that time back. And so the time I spent, in manuals trying to learn Digital Performer, I should have been practicing.
Everybody knows almost doesn't count.
Practicing. You know what? Sometimes you just have to cut up the time throughout the day and create a schedule that feels good to you. For instance, for me, I had to make time to carve out to do these podcasts because the interviews are great and they happen organically. But the editing and putting it all together, man, that takes time. So I've dedicated my afternoon sessions to my media. And my morning sessions, I compose and I produce. My early morning, I practice and meditate and do the things for me. I work out. So build a schedule, find out how you like to operate, and try to stick to it as best you can. Wow, there's just so much. I could talk to you for hours, brother, but fitness, fad or lifestyle? And I know personally from watching you, for you it's a lifestyle.
Right.
But can you stress about how important it is for the working musician to make it a lifestyle rather than a fad?
Sure. So, I mean, I do take it seriously. It's like
Yes.
I'm paid to look good on stage.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And by the way, you look great. And
Thank you so much. It's a lot of hard work.
definitely not something that just happens. I know you have to get in there and work it out. And I actually start out every day with these three things. Now it's just natural, but at one point I decided that I was going to focus on these three things, and that's first was spiritually. Like every single day, I'm going to pursue God in one way or another, right? Every single day, I'm going to pursue my craft, right? I'm going to practice in one way or another, and every single day, I'm going to work out. I'm going to take care of my body.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and whether that's what you will not eat a lot of,
Right.
or what you're going to eat a lot of.
Right.
Okay, you know, being like green things and
More things that are grown naturally than processed or produced in a factory. Yeah.
you know, it's
absolutely.
all, you know, you don't need me in it. You know, you can just pick up any book. But
Yeah.
so really, those are three things for me that I took seriously. And you know, again, you know, life has no promises. That none of that will say, well, I'm going to be around in another 30 years. None of that.
That's right. None of it will guarantee.
You know, but what it will say is that you can feel good about yourself. You can be a better vessel to, which is at the end of the day the most important thing, that you can be a clearer vessel to actually accomplish what you were supposed to accomplish while you're here, because it's going to be up before you know it. And you can feel better at the end of it. You know, reading Miles Davis' book has been enlightening for me. You know, just talking about how, you know, he knew that he had messed his body up so bad that he was struggling at the end to try to do.
Reverse it.
It was harder for him to accomplish because of the way he had messed his body up. So yeah, that's good. That's good for everybody.
That is such a great way to go out. I have to say, you have blessed me in so many ways in my life, and anybody listening to this podcast is, I'm sure, it will be agreeable with that. Last concept, and it doesn't have to be long, grace. You have shown me a lot of grace. When I was on the road with you, I did an 8-year residency with you as your guitar player. There were times when you should have kicked my ass out, but you didn't. There were times you should have took me in the back and slapped me around. You had Mac do it, Uncle Mac. I love Mac. Mac is our front of house guy, production manager at the time. I love you, Mac. I can't wait to let him hear this. But you know, I find myself in similar situations now as a musical director or corralling musicians. You know, I say, hey man, you get this knucklehead, and you just, come on man, don't make it difficult. Just be cool, be workable, be patient, go with the flow. You know, I know what you're gonna say because grace is bestowed upon us every single day.
Yes, indeed.
So who are we to not do the same, right? Let it
That's
flow
it,
through our
man.
fingers. And,
You said it, man. You know, and yet, you know, Jesus still had to break it down. He
Yeah.
you know, he told the story.
Yeah.
As always, you know, he said, well, so this guy owed this other, you know, owed the king, you know, everything, basically couldn't pay. And so he went and he begged. He said, please, you know, have mercy on me. And the king said, all right, I'm going to have mercy on you this time, you know. But, you know, by this time you could have paid it off, you know. So then he went straight home, and his boy owed him something. And he goes, you know, beating his butt to give it to me now. And so the king heard about it. He's like, wait a minute, did I hear this correctly? That you didn't have grace on, you know.
Yeah,
So I mean, that's
it.
Really is
There you go.
that's what it's all about.
What do you need? I love you so much.
Yeah,
I
man, love you
appreciate you
back.
so much.
Nomad in the house, in the hizzy. Hashtag nomadic.
Well, as Tom Braxton says, Cardinal Bishop Dr. Whalum.
Blasting the stereotype of musicians. Follow us at the Career Musician Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's interview, be sure to leave a review and subscribe to the Career Musician Podcast. Check out nomadsplace.com for more info.
I'm just a nomad, nowhere man, writing the songs in this one-man band. A nomad, yeah, I'm a nomad.
That's a wrap for today. Be sure to leave a review and subscribe to the Career Musician Podcast.